Okay, guys, so we are now doing pages 22 to 27 of the World Wars, and this is carving a new frontier. So, with the German army in retreat after the Battle of the Marne, the ambitious Schlieffen plan was in tatters. And remember what that plan was. Remember, they were hoping that they could beat France and then turn around and take care of Russia. But they weren't able to do it. They didn't get there in time. Desperate to turn the situation back to their advantage, Kaiser Wilhelm appointed General Erich von Falkenhayn as overall commander in place of General von Moltke. But Moltke had one final order for his exhausted troops: to fortify and defend their positions above the river Aisne. And I don't know that I'm pronouncing that right. Aisne. This simple instruction would change the whole course of the war. And this is the ground where the Allies dug their first trenches. It was very wet and prone to flooding. So the German armies halted their retreat at the Clemen des Dames Bridge. They turned this 25-mile-long wedge of high ground into a fortress protected by a network of trenches, barbed wire, and machine gun posts. When the British and French attacked the ridge on September 14, they were stopped dead in their tracks. Caught without shelter from the German guns, the Allies started digging their own defensive trenches. Amazingly, they would still be living in these crumbling earthworks for 4 years later, fighting over much the same shell-scarred battlefield. So as the Germans retreated to the Aisne, Aisne, they blew up bridges behind them, making it difficult for the British and French to pursue them. Frustrated by the holdup at the Chemin des Dames Ridge, the Allies changed their tactics. And remember, the Allies are the green guys, okay? So they came up on Germany. Germany's in these trenches, so they changed their tactics. The country to the north of it lay open. If the French could rush an army around the side or flank of Falkenhayn's troops, they would be able to cut the German supply lines and capture the ridge. But Falkenhayn had his own plans for the gap to the north. He ordered his generals to outflank the British and seize the channel ports of Calais, Dunkirk, and Boulogne. So I'm trying to see on this map here if any of these were on this here. I'm trying to see. 100 miles away. His soldiers could then march on Paris and snatch a stunning victory for their new commander. So they're still trying to get to Paris here. Both sides scrambled north in what became known as the Race to the Sea. They fought battles and dug trenches along the way, marking their progress across the Belgian region of Flanders. But the race ended in a frustrating draw as the opposing armies arrived on the dark waters of the North Sea. And so here's the North Sea, okay? So this is where they've ended up being. Before either could win an advantage, Falkenhayn's generals found what they thought was a weak point in the British-held territory at the Belgian town of Ypres, Y-P-R-E-S. There, in late October, they launched a desperate attack. The Battle of Ypres was a bloody and disastrous introduction to trench fighting for all concerned. The British were outnumbered, outgunned, and ill-prepared, but they still managed to hold their ground. The German infantry suffered terrible casualties, losing whole battalions of young recruits as they charged across the open fields to their deaths. The fighting finally sputtered out at the end of November, when heavy rains turned the battlefield to mud and ammunition supplies ran low. Still, in Allied hands, Ypres would be the setting for years of bitter fighting and another 2 major battles. Already, at least 50,000 German and 24,000 British troops lay dead in Flanders fields. And I'm wondering if this is the battle to the sea here, if this is the race to the sea. I'm wondering if that's bluffs along the Aisne River and dug in. Yeah, so here's another video. Okay, so yeah, that's just another battle. Okay, and then we've got a trench lock. So this says, so this is a medieval cloth hall at Ypres was damaged in the early weeks of the fighting. By 1918, it was reduced to rubble, which is so sad. The fast-paced fighting of the previous months now ground to a standstill. Trenches stretched out from the Chemin des Dames Ridge in a jagged scar across northern Europe. This border between armies was known as the Western Front. It snaked 475 miles from the Belgian coast to the mountains of Switzerland. Okay, and you can see that on this page here. You know, here's the Belgian coast, and then over here are the mountains of Switzerland. Mountains of Switzerland. Okay. Belgian coast over here to the mountains of Switzerland. Sorry, I was saying. And of course, they remain neutral. But that's where they were saying all these battles were taking place. Millions of men guarded their dirt fortifications with the industrial might of Europe's nations gearing up behind them. The long years of deadlock in the trenches had only just begun. And this map here shows some of the battles that were taking place in this area right of France, okay? And on this map, you can see that. We're talking about right over here is where those are taking place. All right, fire, wire, and mud. Commanders on both sides believed the war in the trenches would be short-lived, but they were used to fighting in the open with armies charging at each other across huge battlefields. The shelter of the trenches combined with the destructive power of modern weapons made it impossible for either side to break through in the old way. In the winter of 1914, whole armies ground to a halt. They would spend years locking horns in the mud. The tactics and weapons used in an attack hadn't changed much since the 19th century, but defending troops had a range of new and deadly tools at their disposal. Their rifles, machine guns, and high explosive shells ripped any attacking infantry to shreds. This firepower could have destroyed the warring armies in less than a year if it hadn't been for the shelter offered by the trenches. Wow, this says you can play a game to defend a trench and choose the equipment you might need. Oh, I forgot. So there were actually, so hold on a second. I forgot that there were other pages here that we could do, and I forgot to tell you all about those. So, yeah, so we were on 10 to 11. Oh, I meant to change pages each time, and I forgot. So now we're on page 24 and 25. Oh, shoot. Okay. So what is barbed wire and how and why was it used in the war? Okay, so we've got a few videos here that I'm going to put up for you guys after we're done with those three things as well. Okay. This is a detail from Over the Top by John Nash, an official war artist for the British government. The stark scene depicts the artist's own experience of war in the trenches. Okay. So the trenches may have been filthy, uncomfortable, and dangerous places, but they did offer some protection from enemy fire. German military engineers took particular care designing their trenches. Their front line was a labyrinth of ditches, tunnels, and deep shelters that protected soldiers from explosive shells. They were also quick to lay thick beds of razor-sharp barbed wire to protect their trenches. It was hard to cut by hand, and exploding shells only lifted it off the ground and dropped it down in a tangled and impenetrable mess. So for both sides, it was easy to defend a position, but almost impossible to attack it successfully. But even after the slaughter at Ypres, many generals were still convinced that by shelling enemy positions and then sending waves of attacking infantry, they would eventually break the enemy line and force a return to fighting in the open. However, millions of men would die testing this theory in the blood-soaked years to come. The order to go over the top meant that soldiers had to scramble out of their trenches and charge straight into enemy fire. On the night before an infantry attack, thousands of soldiers would gather at the front. They could hear their own shells screaming overhead and crashing into enemy lines. It all went according to plan. If all went according to plan, the barrage would clear a path through the barbed wire and kill most of the defenders, but it rarely did. The open ground between the trench lines, known as no man's land, was a strip of broken, desolate earth, stripped bare of any vegetation by shell fire. It could be anything from shouting distance to 3 miles wide. In most attacks, commanders lost sight of their men the moment they climbed up into the smoke and confusion of no man's land. The only way to give them new orders was by messenger or by means of an experimental telephone system that used buried wires. But messengers were shot down as they sprinted back and forth, and high explosive shells slamming into the ground cut the telephone wires. It could take hours for an officer to receive vital orders, while the situation around him was changing by the second. In the first years of the war, soldiers were ordered not to run or zigzag as they crossed no man's land. Generals thought troops might get confused and panic if they didn't advance in orderly ranks. But this only made it easier for enemy machine gunners to mow them down in neat lines. In this painting, French troops make the terrifying journey across no man's land, past tangles of barbed wire to attack. And I don't know if you guys have ever been in barbed wire, but I stepped in barbed wire one time and got my leg stuck in it. I still have scars today from it. It is tough stuff. Okay, so we're going to stop there. That is through page 25. So we're going to stop there, and I'm going to put some stuff up for you guys that you can do with this.